Welcome to Leaving Nothing to Chance, your go-to podcast where we bring you insights from some of the most influential voices in small business and personal development. Each week, we dive deep into conversations with top thought leaders, authors, and business moguls from around the world, sharing their secrets to success and strategies for growth. Tune in for exclusive content that will inspire, motivate, and equip you to take your journey to the next level. This is Leaving Nothing to Chance.
Well, welcome everybody to another show today. And this one's going to be a lot of fun and a little bit different. My new friend, Dominic Chilipo from Toronto, and just a little bit about Dominic, because I could go on forever. He's had such an amazing career as an award-winning filmmaker, a writer, a director, an actor, a producer, both on film as well as stage. He's a great storyteller. And you'll hear during the course of this interview us refer to a short film that he wrote and produced called Mimmo and Paulie that I just watched this afternoon. Compelling, great writing, and amazing in less than 30 minutes that you could tell really a story of two gentlemen from start to finish. Congratulations on just being a phenomenal writer and storyteller, Dominic.
Thank you. And pleasure to be here, John. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for being here. And you're a graduate of the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York City. You've been in numerous productions, shows, helped aspiring writers, directors, et cetera, et cetera. So you've had a tremendous career. Thank you for being here today. And let's just start at the top, because I just watched the production of Mimmo and Paulie. And we were talking off screen about one of the two actors on there that a lot of people will recognize, David Zayas. And you may not know his name, but when you see him, you'll go, I've seen that guy.
Yeah.
So I had to Google.
Definitely familiar face.
If you're a fan of Oz or Law and Order or shows like that, you'll certainly recognize
Dexter as well.
David. Yeah, he's been around, certainly great actor. And the other gentleman did a great job as well. But Mimmo and Paulie, what was your inspiration for that?
So it initially started off, as you can tell from watching the film, two guys in one room literally having a conversation. It originally started off as part of a play, which was a series of vignettes about a group of friends. And then upon showing it to the actors and doing a reading of it, somebody stepped up and said, I'd like to finance this as a film. So we went that route. But my initial intention with that piece was to explore the limits of friendship. We all have or have had long-term relationships, childhood friendships. And you think you know someone very well. The question to myself was, what could possibly stir up a long-term relationship between two guys that are very much like brothers? So I came up with this idea, having an idea of who they were and their sensibilities and how one would react to the news he was getting. So my intention was to just explore a relationship and what could ultimately break it.
It was gripping to watch. I couldn't stop. I got a phone call in between. I let the phone call go to voicemail. And I was like, I got to watch this. I was about 14 minutes in, so about halfway through. And it was just that gripping. And yeah, you could see the real life circumstance of two buddies, obviously knew each other, had done a lot of stuff together, good, bad, and indifferent, knew each other at many different levels. And all of a sudden, one has a secret that the other is shocked at.
Right.
And eventually, I imagine would get over, but it was unexpected. And you had offers from the Sundance Channel after this particular show, the Independent Film Channel, et cetera, et cetera. So what's been the history of it?
So going back to 2004 when I made that film, and at the time it did very well in the festival circuit, got a lot of offers from these channels that were big at the time. However, I went into the festival run already having a feature-length version based on this short, a feature-length screenplay. And David Zayas, the lead actor, and I were already shopping it around. And I was already in a position where it looked like that feature screenplay, things were seeming like they were lining to get it made. And as a result, I didn't want to put the short on television at the time because I didn't want one of the big moments of what was going to be the feature film to be publicly exposed, so to speak. In hindsight, career-wise, it probably wasn't the right thing to do because the feature film never got made. I stopped pursuing it after a few years and went another route. But back in the day, Sundance Channel and Independent Film Channel were pretty big. And so having had my short film on there probably would have been a smart career move to have made. But it's one of those things that you live and learn, and I can't regret, but probably wasn't the right decision at the time.
And just staying on it, you wind up with about 28 minutes of content by the time you probably edit. Sometimes you edit out a few things, et cetera, et cetera. But how do you tell a story, really a life story of two people in that brief a period of time? I can't give directions in 28 minutes. So.
Yeah, I hear
A
you.
lot of people can.
It's different than your traditional film in that it doesn't go through a series of time where you're developing the characters and then seeing them go through transitional things from beginning, middle, and end, like a traditional film, whether it be a short or a full length. This literally is a 28-minute conversation in real time. And so the challenge there was it's like you're looking through a window on a conversation about two people not knowing any history about them or about their relationship. But the challenge is to still make it compelling enough so that to some degree you learn who these guys are, you learn that they have a history without exposition. So the challenge is to create that and create the story that's compelling and moving forward just with dialogue. And we've all had long conversations with people that if a stranger were to look in on that conversation would learn a lot about the two people just through that conversation without knowing the full history. But I think, and kudos to the actors here, I think you get a real sense of who these guys are. And it's clear from the dialogue that they do have a long-standing history. And then it's just a matter of, I knew where I wanted to start and I knew where I wanted to end. And how does a dialogue drive that forward? It's what I call action through dialogue and action through characters. You've got action with bells and whistles and cars blowing up, which is great. It can be a great tool for storytelling under the right story. But I see dialogue as action as well. Dialogue that lets you know who the characters are and moves the story forward in a way that feels natural. And I had this is a funny story while submitting it to festivals. I had a program director from South by Southwest call me, and he said he doesn't make these calls, but wanted to call me personally to tell me he was sorry that the film did not get accepted because he loved it and everyone else loved it, but it didn't fit into their programming. And I thought, okay, I appreciate the call. And then he went on to say, it is the best improv work I've ever seen on film. And I said, thank you, but not a word of it was improvised. It was all scripted. And he said, oh, I wish I had known that. I took that as a compliment in the end. Of course, I would have rather have gotten into South by Southwest, a very big festival, but I took that as a real compliment because it does flow naturally and it seems like real dialogue and it seems like they're not reading words off of a script. And again, certainly you need good actors to pull that off. But the fact that actors can take that dialogue and make it very real to themselves so that it comes across just two people talking. And that's one of my fortes in all the stuff that I write. It's really about dialogue and is it real? Does it ring true? And is it specific to what's going on? And finding a way to move the story forward without the exposition and keeping in mind that the actors should only say what's real to them and not the words on the page should not really be telling the story for the purpose of the viewer. It's really just about moving the story forward with the dialogue.
You make a very interesting point there because how I felt watching it was like I was eavesdropping on a conversation that I wasn't necessarily welcome to be eavesdropping in. And as a viewer, for a writer to accomplish that, it takes a very skilled writer where you really feel like you're a third person in the room without being there.
Yeah.
And that's how I felt watching it. It was like, wow, I feel like I'm actually sitting here observing this without these two guys knowing that I'm here. And that's some good writing, to say the least. So, yeah, you're very good at what you do. So let's talk about a couple of other things. One of which is you're able and available to some degree. I know you're a busy guy, obviously, with all the things you're involved with. For our listeners, some of them that have either a life story that they want to tell, perhaps a business story entwined with their life story, maybe a product that they're bringing to market or they've brought to market successfully, and they want to tell their story in a first person way with some good writing and some good editing, et cetera, et cetera. So they get to the point, they cut to the chase, so to speak. So talk a little bit about the availability that you have and some of the ideas that you have that can aid some of our listeners.
Yeah, so right now I've been spending a lot of my time focusing on writing personal stories. I segued from strictly acting to writing years ago, although I still do acting in the sense like I have a one-man play that I've put up recently and I'm looking to do again in a few months in Toronto. So that sort of gets my keeps my acting juices active, so to speak. I got into a period where I was doing a lot of work for hire as a writer. And that was a great feeling through the success of the short, having shown the short to certain people. I was on Fiverr for a little while and started getting some feedback that way and some clients that way, doing a lot of doctoring of scripts and writing scripts from scratch. And I found I got to a point where, very much like the acting, I'm going to take a long way to answer this. Way back when I was an actor, it's something, unfortunately, where you have to get used to rejection. You go to a lot of auditions and you hear more no's than yeses. And you get to a point where when somebody says yes, you're so thrilled that you accept the role. And I found myself in New York doing productions where I would spend 3 or 4 months on a stage production. And then in the end, really feeling like I didn't get a lot out of it as a creative person. And in hindsight, only did it because they said yes to me and wanted to cast me in something. And so it was around that time where I thought maybe I should start writing for myself as an actor, the type of material that I want to do, and the type of stories that I want to tell. So I started doing that. And then that led to 2 short films, one of which we talked about, and then led to recently doing a lot of writing for hire. And I found that the writing for hire work took a similar turn where I was spending 3, 4, 5, 6 months on scripts, but not necessarily, again, telling the stories that I wanted to tell. And though I have my own screenplays that I'm shopping around and looking to get produced and financed that are very dear and close to me, these other writing assignments have helped pay the bills. And so, again, you say yes to them. But in the end, again, I was like, I've just spent 6 months writing this thing. It's great. I'm proud of it. Ghost written, so my name's not on it. That's great. But I'm not really feeling fulfilled. And I thought, if I'm going to keep doing this writing for hire work, let me target people who have stories that speak to what I want to say. And that is a lot about not necessarily the rags to riches, but journeys through people's personal lives, how they've gone from point A to B, C, and D, and what they've learned throughout the process. So it could be a very personal story, rags to riches, or it could be a story about taking someone's philosophy and showing it in a film. So I've been approaching people, and my last few assignments have been much closer to home in terms of that. There's a great immigrant story I'm working on, a rags to riches story. And there's another story I'm working on where it's not a full life story, but it's about a particular incident with a loss of a family member and how this person learned so much from having experienced that. And as I listened to him tell his story to me, I realized that it was very much in tune with the type of stuff I want to tell. There's nothing wrong with stories that strictly entertain. I've got a few screenplays like that myself. I'm shopping around right now, something that is a very dark comedy murder mystery, which is very marketable. And in the end, it has a relationship element to it that is closer to home. But generally, my stuff is a lot more about ultimately inspiring personal growth, even though it may not seem like that's the case in the material itself, but to provoke thought and inspire people in a way that moves the needle forward a bit. So that's what I've been focusing on now. So I'm being more selective about the writing assignments and specifically targeting stories that speak to the type of stories that I want to tell and I think are worth telling.
Yeah, there's so we have a mutual friend that introduced us, Joe Garcia, right? There's so many stories in the network marketing industry of exactly what you just described, either rags to riches, or sometimes somebody was in a horrible marriage. I have a lot of single women, for example, that or single moms that become tremendously successful and are just driven. Just often say, just you get a single mom, just get out of her way.
Yes.
Tell her what to do and give her a roadmap and just get out of the way because she'll get it done and or she'll run you over if you're in the way. And on immigrant stories certainly as well in that industry and in other industries. We see that in lots of industries, but yeah, there's so much of that there. And that's a lot of our audience. A lot of our listenership are people in the network marketing industry. So you would be available if somebody said, hey, let me tell my story.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I love to have initial phone calls with people. And then the process that if I end up working with someone on this, the process varies depending on how developed or how far along that story is. If I'm working with already someone who is a writer to a degree and they may already have a rough draft, it's their first time out and they don't know how to structure it in a very compelling storytelling fashion, then that's a different process than someone who has a story to tell but really has not put anything down on paper yet. But in a case like this, there is a lot of meetings to begin with where I get very clear on the story and also make the client clear on the story he or she is trying to tell. Sometimes they'll start off thinking they're telling one story, and as they're discussing it, and I probe them with the right questions, and it's a matter of, oh, maybe this is really the story I'm telling or I want to tell from this scenario or from this series of events. So before I even start writing the scenes, we get very clear on the structure, the story, and then break it down into scenes just in pinpoint. So here's what we're going to do, scene 1 through 30, 40, whatever it is. And when we get to an agreement on the outline, then literally I go away and start writing, sending pages as I write and meeting continually until we come up with that nice finished draft.
Great. I think it's a process that a lot of our listeners will probably be contacting you on to certainly find out about because there's a lot of great stories and a lot of inspirational stories, more importantly.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I've always loved those personal stories. And there's been a lot of biopics made of famous people from rags to riches. And you know what? I feel like my feeling is everyone, whether you're a blue collar worker, multi-million-dollar entrepreneur, everyone's got at least one story in them to tell. And whether it be a personal story or just something they've come up with through their imagination that feel like, oh, I've got this great idea for a story. And those are interesting because even when they've got this great idea for a story that they feel has nothing to do with their personal lives, as you dig, you realize that it's coming from something personal that you may not even realize. But yeah, my feeling is everyone has at least one story in them to tell. And getting a film made is not an easy process, but I've been amazed how many times people walk away with a finished script and it takes them to the next step of actually seeing it come to life.
And one point on that too, Dominic, I'd love your thoughts on this too, is I remember back when Obama was running for president down here that he had written a book, and I don't remember the name of the book, but when they interviewed him, he said, I didn't write it to get elected. I wrote it for my two daughters because I think it was either his mom or I think it was his mom passed away like in her late 30s or something. He said, something that happens to me, at least it's kind of, here's who your dad was. And
Yeah,
I thought that was good advice. I went off and wrote a few books myself just for the same reason. Really, yeah, I wrote them for commercially, but at the end of the day, I really wrote them so if something happened to me, my kids would know, yeah, here's who dad was. Here's what he thought. Here, about business. My things are really more about business, but there's always the personal part in there, what was going on.
absolutely.
So I think what you're talking about here has a multiplicity of things, especially for someone who's been successful, who says 2 generations from now, when when we're gone or we're in a nursing home or whatever, when our grandkid says, "Who was Grandpa? Who was Grandpa?" No, I think it's
Right.
a living testimony to who that individual was. And of course, today there's so much great technology to record on. They don't have to come to Toronto to do it. They can do it by Zoom or whatever.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's look, to your point, it's very easy now. Look, we're on camera a million miles away from each other. Well, not a million, but you get the point. But with today's technology, you can just look into your phone and record your story and leave something for your kids, grandkids. Finding people who have a story to tell, but want to do it in a creative fashion. And yes, leave something for their kids and family, but also feel that that their story is compelling enough to want to get it out there to a larger audience and hopefully to teach and inspire through that. I think of people like a Joe Dispenza, who is extremely well known, and he's got a certain philosophy around manifestation and how your feelings and your state of being create your life. He's got a huge following, but I can't help but think, as an example, I can't help but think if you took his philosophy and actually made or demonstrated it in a storytelling fashion, in a narrative way,
Mhm.
and this were then to become a successful film, you're going to reach a whole other audience that way than the audience you're targeting. Because as anyone who knows a Joe Dispenza or Anthony Robbins, they do because they've at some point they've become aware of this whole self-development, personal growth thing. And so that sort of takes them into the research world, which is very easy nowadays. But there are a huge majority of people that have no idea of that part of the world. And not to say they're not happy. I know a lot of people who know nothing about spiritual growth, personal growth, or at least not consciously. They're working a job, they're very happy, have a successful family life, and doing very well. And they're just not actively into the personal growth thing, although at a subconscious level, they are. But there's a whole audience out there that isn't aware of this stuff. And I feel like people like that, like Anthony Robbins, also has a crazy history. Ed Milet, a lot of these people have a very compelling story of what brought them to where they are. And so taking that story, for instance, infused with their philosophy and their teachings, I think could reach a much larger audience and a different kind of audience and can open up a larger part of society to the whole world of personal growth. And I think ultimately that's what anybody in this field is looking to do, trying to get as many that there's more to life than just the 9 to 5 grind.
Exactly, exactly. So let's talk about your new one-man play, Miles from Somewhere. What's the status of that? What are you doing with that?
First of all, I wouldn't say it's new in the sense that I first produced it in New York City in 2003. It was around the time that I was making the short film. And then I didn't put it up again until about 9 years later. And so since then, I've done it every few years in different places. And each time there's revisions to it. Because as much as it's not a personal story, it speaks a lot to this whole idea of personal growth. And it's funny because back in 2003, I wasn't even conscious of that. I just wrote this, and over the years, it's evolved. And so each time I do it, I look at it again and make revisions based on new experiences I've had or new learnings that I've personally had. But it is ultimately about, it's called Miles from Somewhere, as you said, somewhere being that place that many of us are trying to get to, that magical place. If I can only get to this place, and it's not a place geographically, but a place spiritually, mindset. Everyone's got a goal. Everyone wants to get to a certain place, whether it be a combination of financial, family, love, all those things. And the idea that sometimes we're reaching for that somewhere so much that we forget to appreciate the moment and the life we're currently in. And this is expressed in a way through a main character called Sal, who speaks to the audience and goes through different phases of lessons, so to speak. He talks about the morality of lying and honesty and integrity, and then he'll talk about drug addiction, and he'll talk about death and the loss of loved ones. And in between each of those topics, I then played two other characters that speak to the topic he's just spoken about. And those characters are on stage from anywhere from 2 to 3 minutes, not speaking to the audience, but speaking to an imaginary partner on stage. And in the end, it is very inspiring, thought-provoking, and it makes a lot of people look at their lives in a different way. And whenever I've done it, it's been amazing to hear the response from audience members. And I've had people months and years later come out and say how it's stayed with them and it's really affected their thought process. So that, as a writer, as a creator, as a performer, there's no better accolade than something like that, than knowing that you've actually been able to affect someone's life in a small way.
Yeah, absolutely. Along that line, writing, directing, acting, three different skill sets, triple threat. Do you think that because your background is in writing, that a one-man play you could deliver maybe different than an actor who doesn't have the writing skills that you have?
Yes, absolutely. Now, there's been a lot of one-man plays where the actor has taken somebody else's material and done it extremely well. There's a lot of writers who have written one-man plays or one-person plays and aren't actors themselves and have written them for the purpose of someone else performing them. For me, as it's always been, way going back to when I started writing plays and producing off-Broadway plays, it was about not just writing the material, but performing in it. My initial purpose for writing was, again, to create the type of work for myself as an actor that I wanted to portray. It was during the production of my very first play where I had hired a different director to direct us, the cast, where I quickly realized, okay, if I want my stories, not my writing, to now be told with the vision that I have as I'm writing them, I also need to direct. So then I started directing and acting. And then in certain cases, like in the case of my two short films, there was a time where I thought, should I play one of the actors? But then when I got two such powerhouse actors interested in this, I thought, this is ridiculous. Let me just focus on the writing, the directing, and make this the best it can be without being in front of the camera as well. So acting is something, I think I can only speak from experience. Obviously, as an actor, I've performed other people's material. And when I perform other people's material, of course, working with the director, you try to make it as much your own. But in something like the one-man play that I've written, I have liberty that you would not have if you were an actor doing somebody else's material. I have liberty to make changes from one night to the next if I feel I want to. So it's liberating that way. I think being an actor certainly has made me a better writer, because people have always said, have referred to me as an actor's writer, in that my characters are very well developed. And my feeling is, whether I'm writing a character that is my type or not. I want to make sure that it's something that an actor who is physically appropriate for the role is going to want to do it, because it's got some heart, it's got some meat to it. So I'm not sure if that answers your question directly. The acting, I think, definitely, my background in acting has definitely helped shape me into the writer I am. And I think the directing just comes naturally with how I write a story and how I see it. Somebody else could have taken that same script, Mimmo and Paulie. As we said, it's two guys talking for 28 minutes. So the script would be the script. But the way the camera moves and how you focus on certain emotional moments versus others, that's the stuff that if you gave that script to 5 different directors, you would end up with 5 slightly different films, even though the dialogue and the outcome is the same. So the director in me comes from writing and seeing it visually as I'm writing.
So certainly the characters, yeah, the actors did a great job.
Yeah.
You did a great job writing it and bring the actors to life, and they both certainly did their job, but you certainly did yours as the writer, because like I said, people need to see it. So let's talk about a couple of things here as we start to wrap up, Dominic. Where can people see? I know you sent it to me, but I don't know, is it something that if you like people to see, where can they go? And
yeah, if anyone wants to see the short film, you can literally go to YouTube and type in Mimmo and Paulie, Mimmo and Paulie. Or you can find a link through my website where I have other information and other excerpts, samples of my writing stuff. And my website is Cinemod Production, CINEMOD Productions.com.
now, is that also, if they're interested in finding out about, from a personal standpoint, if they're interested in finding out about how to do their story for?
Yeah, you can email me through my website. I can give that here too. That would be Dominic, DOMENIC, at cinemodproductions.com. And my phone number is on the website as well.
Great. This has been a pleasure and interesting, and continued good success. So what's on the horizon? I know a guy like you's always got something you're working on. What's the next 3 months, 6 months?
I look over here because I'm just wrapping up one screenplay and I've got 2 others I'm working on, work for hires. And I'm in the process of some meetings with my own screenplays as well, hoping to get those off the ground. So just keeping at it. And as I said, I'm looking to put up my one-man play later this summer, downtown Toronto. I did it just outside of Toronto a couple times, and now that I'm making more contacts downtown in the industry, it's time to move it down there.
Great. Hey, and by the way, we have a huge following in Ontario. All my Ontario friends, come on out, support Dominic, enjoy the show, and try to say hello to him afterwards. Shake his hand, get some pictures, stick him on Facebook, and help him promote the show, because he's a great guy, very talented, and I appreciate you being on the show today, Dom.
Excellent. Thank you for having me, John. It's been a pleasure and very nice meeting you. Thank you.
You too.
Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to check back weekly for more exciting episodes. And don't miss Ink and Insight every Wednesday, where we celebrate iconic authors and dive into their impactful works.